It's toxic and it's dangerous. The other sex is dangerous. Before it was just icky.
Yeah.
Now it's no, they are dangerous. Okay, from a young age. And boys are hearing this from the youngest of ages. Why would you marry somebody? And girls are hearing this from the youngest age. Like, you don't need a man. Well, yeah, again, it is the way for a society to literally disappear.
Hello and welcome to Awake at the Wheel. So in a previous episode, we tackled the social media phenomenon regarding man versus bear, where women were asked would they rather be trapped in the woods with a man or a bear. So go back and watch that episode if you want some more context on that. But the response on social media to that has been the question posed now to men of, would you rather share your emotions with a woman or with a tree? There's a lot of backlash about this, a lot of upset people, much like there was with the man versus bear. But I think that it warrants some discussion. And what we're going to do today is look at a few videos that are posted online regarding this and talk about our thoughts on it. So without further ado, let's watch the first one.
Gentlemen, stitch me and tell me, would you rather tell your deepest, darkest secrets to a woman or a tree?
You know, you can always count on Tammy to ask a great question, and this one may be the best she's ever asked. So would I choose to open myself up to a tree or a woman? The answer is very simple. The tree. And here's why. First off, the tree is going to provide guaranteed confidentiality. You see, a man knows that the tree isn't going to immediately go running to gossip about the secrets he just shared with its friends and family members. It isn't going to go posting whatever he said all over social media later on to mock him or get clicks and likes. No matter how juicy the details he shares, that majestic oak or pine isn't going to go around spilling the beans. The tree is also going to provide a judgment-free zone. It isn't going to judge the man for daring to make himself vulnerable. It isn't going to mock him or leave him or call into question his manliness or worthiness as a man simply because he has some issues that he's dealing with. You see, the tree is wise beyond its years. It's seen centuries of human folly and knows that no one is perfect, most especially those who sit in judgment of others for having emotions or feelings, opinions, or concerns, as almost all women do when a man dares to open up to them. Instead, that tree is going to provide a safe place for the man to vent. A place where that man can freely express himself without having to worry that whatever he says is going to be weaponized against him, not just now, but for years to come. And finally, that tree is going to show caring, concern, and patience with the man. Unlike women, the tree is actually going to sit and listen to what the man is saying. It isn't going to get all emotional or jump to conclusions. It isn't going to interrupt the man to tell him he's wrong, nor is the tree going to try and twist what he's saying and make it about them. The man knows that the tree isn't going to rush the conversation and try and get it over with because it doesn't like what he's saying or feels uncomfortable with the words he's sharing. The bottom line of it all, the tree is going to be the perfect partner, the one who isn't going to get bored or upset with the man or seek to destroy him for daring to make himself vulnerable or simply because he's a man.
Okay, so I guess I'm a tree because what it sounds like he's describing is a therapist. Okay, where do I even start with this? So perhaps it's for social media effect, but let's assume that it's not. I can hear a great deal of pain and frustration in this man's description of what his needs are and what needs he has that are not being met. What I take issue with not only, this particular question, but also the man versus bear, is it is so divisive. Like everything in the world right now, everything is so-and-so versus so-and-so. All of these have been is man versus woman and who's worse and for what reason. So that, I think, in large part is why this question is problematic. But if we look at it a layer deeper, I think that not that he speaks for all men, but I think that there's certainly a gap in terms of men's ability to be able to speak freely about what they're experiencing. And this goes back to a previous episode that we did when we spoke about men's mental health. And the topic of men's mental health is often something that people raise their eyebrows about, because the question is, well, shouldn't it be the same? Absolutely not. As our listeners know, the majority of the clients that I work with are male first responders. These are some of the toughest men out there. And this isn't in any sort of, tricky or manipulative way, but the way in which I approach that client population is very different than I would approach, let's say, a stay-at-home mom. And I don't say that to stereotype or to minimize anybody's challenges, but men have really gotten the short end of the stick, especially, masculine men, when it comes to being able to express their emotions and to talk about their emotions. And to this individual's point, oftentimes, I suppose they don't feel safe sharing with women for all of the reasons that he named off there. And this is somewhat tangential, but I remember years ago, I wish I had it prepared for today, but I don't. But years ago, I read of a study that looked at the brain scans in real time of men and women being exposed to the same stimulus as far as something that is emotionally provoking. And in almost all cases, the man's brain imaging lit up far more than the women's with the same emotional stimulus. But the way that men are socialized to express that emotion is vastly different than the way that women are. So women were outwardly showing the emotion more, but physiologically men were experiencing it more. And I bring that up because the fact is, men have emotions, men have strong emotions, but we live in a society where they clearly don't feel safe or able or welcome to share and express them.
Right. And actually, just to build on what you just said, there was another study where they looked at children. These are little boys and girls, very, very young. I forget the age. I'm going to say 3 to 5. And they were played a recording of a baby crying. And the girls, so now we're not talking socialization here. This is biological. The girls, and as what you're saying as well, I mean, the men's brains light up, right? But the girls, they were looking and trying to find the baby. They were getting distressed, and they wanted to care for this child who's crying. Beautiful. The boys, they weren't doing any of that, but their heart rates were going through the roof. Like they're measuring their heart rates. So the boys are kind of shutting down. And so, for whatever reason, and this is, maybe there was a little bit of socialization, but it just seems to be like a sex difference. So in any event, yes, males do have emotions, boys, girls, boys, men, we do have emotions. And, it sounds like a cliche, but the fact that, years later, we're still talking about it says that, society, parenting, whatever culture, we're not doing a good enough job to let people know or let males know what is the right way to deal with your emotions. Because, and I've had so many men say this to me, so many, where they say, women say on the one hand, they want a man to be expressive, to be emotional, et cetera, et cetera. But on the other hand, if we do that, then we're not real men. Right. Yeah. So that's, and I think in that man's diatribe, I think he did sort of allude to that. I can't remember because there was a whole list of things that he said, which some of which, stereotypically, we know women are more inclined to do. But the way, again, as you say, to your point, when you speak in absolutes, all it does is divide and cause more dissension between the sexes. Like all men are like this, all women are like that. Now, most people understand when you say women do this, it doesn't mean literally all women. We can understand that that's hyperbole. But still, the fact that you're highlighting stereotypes and ugly stereotypes doesn't do any good. It just, again, adds to further division.
Yeah, and to the point that you made about in therapy, women often bring forward the fact that they would like their partner to share more and express more, but then when they do, they feel uncomfortable. I feel like, and I don't know, so I want to hear your thoughts on this, but I feel like there's probably something instinctual or something very base level about that, because in heterosexual relationships, I think that in general, women are the nurturers and men are providers and protectors and so on. So I wonder if that vulnerability challenges or makes females feel uncomfortable and unprotected and unsafe because, well, if he's not feeling good, how is he going to take care of me? I don't know if that's part of it, but I wonder.
Again, here's where we're going to get in trouble because people aren't going to like this. A study just came out last week, I think, or 2 weeks ago. You may have seen on the listserv that we're on, where it's talking about, again, another study showing sex differences. I think it was with babies. So once again, these are biological, they're not cultural. And yes, there are differences. We have many inherent differences biologically. Now, of course, culture plays a huge role, maybe even more of a role, but the biological predispositions that we have are there, and it's not like it's distinct, of course. There's overlap and so on, but males are more likely to this, females more likely, right? So this idea of this need or desire for protection, we are primates. You look at other primates, especially gorillas and so on, that's what the female's looking for, right? That, and I hate to use these terms because a-holes use this term too much, but like an actual alpha male, right? So, and it's kind of funny because people then will use the insult of the beta male and make him look like such a weakling. Just for the record, in primate societies, the beta male is second in command. He's actually, that's not a weak, right? It's not a bad thing to be beta. You're just not the leader, but you're the right-hand man or chimp. So in any event, the point is that I've heard this with so many people. And yes, it's anecdotal, but if you hear so many people saying this, and studies support this as well, many studies do show this, that there is something about wanting a man to protect you and, or a male to protect, to provide, and so on. Now, in today's society, far more females are able to provide for themselves. So it's a little bit different. And, but too many women are being told, you don't need a man to provide. You don't need him for anything, blah, blah. Like, again, that's part of the division. But the question is, and here's two questions to ask. And actually, I just saw this on, I hate to admit it, I'm not going to say which video it was. Okay. But it was a great question. Okay. So I'm going to say it. I'm just not going to. So I'm giving credit to where this came up. Two things. The person was asking to the self-proclaimed feminists. He said, how do you feel about women being conscripted into the army? Okay, not volunteer, but conscripted. Because you got no problem with men being conscripted, being sent to the battlefield to die. So what about women? That was the first question he asked. And the second one, they were saying, if you're in a house with your male partner and someone breaks in, are you going to go challenge the person or do you expect your partner to? Yeah. Right? So, and again, in almost every case, and so women will say the answer that you would expect. Okay, about the male, and so basically they were. He got these so-called feminists to basically admit that they're okay with this, with feminism and all this stuff when it suits them. Yeah. Okay, sex differences when it suits them, but anything else, no. There's no difference. We're all equal. And for years and years, the cliche has been, and it's an important one, which is a good cliche, which is equal but different. Yeah. Okay, right? Anyone who finds that as to be a terrible statement, I don't know what's wrong with you. Okay, saying that people should be treated equal, but we have different strengths, aptitudes, and so on. And of course, anyone who thinks that I'm saying so males can't do this or females shouldn't do that, no. If a male is more effeminate, if a male has more feminine interests and so on and proclivities, all the power to you, right? And if a female is more masculine, she's the leader and she's the head of the household and everything, all the power to you. Great. Right. But again, the whole point of this about the trees and everything is that he was depicting women in such an ugly, destructive light. And again, there are some women like that. OK, but not all women. And it's just the way he said it. And he even said like all women, or he used one of those terms.
Yeah. Well, at the end, like I had a visceral reaction because it's like women are blah, blah, blah. I'm like, relax, bud. We're not all that way. And I frankly question how many women are actually that way. And this is, sort of a side note, but I feel like these things sensationalize these differences. And you and I deal with the public at a high volume, and that's not what my perception of the world is.
Right. Again, I've seen it, and women are more likely to act in that way, but I've seen many women who don't do that. Right. It's just everything that I can't even keep. I thought it was gonna be a shorter video. He had a long list of all these terrible things that women do. And even the thing about interrupting or cutting them short or whatever, that's actually more of a male thing statistically. Right? Research shows that men are more likely to interject, especially if they're uncomfortable or whatever. And so much of what he described, by the way, I have to ask you, some of this, not the gossip and everything, but some of the other stuff he was doing that was like manipulative and twisting, right? When you heard that, what disorder did you think of? I thought of
BPD.
2. Okay, so borderline personality disorder. And I also thought narcissistic personality disorder. Yeah. Okay? Right? The manipulation, turning around on you and stuff like that, using it to hurt you, like, cutting you off and everything. So he's describing people with personality disorders or unhealthy personality characteristics, right?
Which is a whole other discussion of, what types of mates are you attracted to and selecting, and not to say that there's anything, wrong with people who are suffering from personality disorders, but I wonder if there's an element of confirmation bias there is what I'm trying to say.
You think?
Yeah.
Right.
All right.
Maybe let's jump to the next videos, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm sure much more to say.
Okay, in my defense, I thought it was a joke. I never actually heard any discourse of men saying, would you rather tell your feelings to a woman or a tree? I thought this was just a little silly little haha we're all having. But no, it's a thing. Sure, it's completely reactionary, but it's a thing. And as a man who has feelings and who has spoken to women, I guess it's my job to set the record straight a little bit. If you tell your feelings to a woman in a way in which they weren't meant to silence her in what she was saying, then they usually listen pretty well, because people are more willing to listen to things and take them seriously when they're not just constantly weaponized. You want to speak about the anger and frustration you feel inside because you've never been able to process your emotions, so everything comes out in the one form that you are comfortable with? Don't do it in the middle of another argument to try to intimidate them to not speak about that subject. You want to talk about that trauma that you have that affects you in ways that you cannot explain? Maybe don't bring that up when you are trying to explain away a misdeed. Are you really sad and having bad thoughts, which happens to a lot of us? Maybe don't bring that up when they tell you that they don't want to speak to you anymore, and this is a way to get them to care. You know what I mean? If you sit down and you give your feelings the space they deserve, which is not in the middle of a conversation about something else or when you're being held accountable for something, when they're talking about the feelings that they have, then they will be much more likely to listen to you than a tree. And I know this. I speak to trees all the time. Do I feel understood and heard? No, but I really like trees. I really like trees. And you may not think that you do this because no one teaches you the proper time to speak about your emotions. So when they do get brought up, it is mostly in a reactionary way, much like this trend. And if that is the only time you're okay talking about your emotions, of course you don't feel heard. Think about this app when you have a woman or a feminine perceived person talking about their issues and you have some faceless comment there saying, what about men's suicide rate? Then getting upset that people don't care about men's suicide rate. No, you're weaponizing it. Or imagine your partner did something really shitty and you're like, that hurt me. And halfway through they're like, well, my dad hurt me. Okay, we can have a conversation about that then, but you're only bringing this up to sidetrack this. Of course you won't feel heard. You got to speak about your emotions in a mindful way, not in just a way to silence someone else.
So he redeemed himself in the second half, because the first half I'm sitting there like, okay, bud, easier said than done. But he did certainly address some of those issues at the end. But I do want to talk about that first part where he's providing an example of, sometimes people will bring it up in the middle of an argument or when they're being held accountable because they're being triggered. He used the word trauma. If it is something that is truly trauma, yeah, they're probably being triggered and that's coming up. And, the frontal lobe is shut down, their amygdala is fired up. The part of their brain that tells them to have a logical conversation is offline. So I just want to throw that part out there that, I understand the example he was providing there, but it's not that simple.
Okay. Well, I'm glad that we played the video before we spoke further, because he touched upon so many things that I was going to say earlier. Actually, I really liked that video. I thought it was nuanced. I thought it was fair. I thought it had some humor in it and everything. So I like that guy. One of the few videos where I'm going, I really like that guy. So yeah, as you're saying about, if you are being, well, first of all, the first thing that he's really, really talking about is manipulation and weaponization of emotions, right? And especially when I'm working with people with narcissistic personality disorder, right? Or it doesn't have to be narcissistic, but that's the obvious one, right? But such a common phenomenon. Either I see it when I'm working with couples, okay, or I'm working with an individual in a relationship and I hear them describing it. And it's the same pattern, which is I'm coming to you hurt, upset, whatever, okay? And I walk away and we spent the entire time tending to the other person's emotions. Yeah. So I'm invalidated. My experience just gets sidetracked because, the other person is hurt and I'm trying to take care of them. And even if they're not being manipulative, even if they're not intentionally trying to do it, somehow that person's needs trump mine in that moment. And because I'm the nurturer, I'm the more emotionally capable person. I have the higher EQ. And so I'm going to tend to him. But the funny thing is, I being the patient, okay? Yeah. But the funny thing is, if you really had that high of an EQ, you would have recognized what was happening. Mm-hmm. You would have, dealt with it and said, okay, but we still need to talk about my feelings. And if that's not happening, then either you leave or you go to therapy or you find some way to be able to have these discussions where one person, it's not a zero-sum game. One person's needs can't totally take away from, what's it called, supersede another person's needs.
Yeah. It's so interesting though that I'm viewing this kind of through the PTSD lens and you're viewing it through the personality disorder lens, and both are obviously valid. But just an interesting observation I made there, that I'm coming at it as, well, if they're dealing with trauma, then blah, 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 blah.
Right.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, and I've said this to so many people, a couple of things, when we're talking about emotions and so on. And again, we're going a bit of a sidetrack, but we're not just, complaining about videos. We want to expand. So a couple of things. I say this to so many couples, or every couple I deal with, basically. I say there's the logical and the emotional. So when one person's saying something, logically you understand it. And I get them to use this language, saying, I fully understand what you're saying. I get it intellectually. Mm-hmm. But emotionally, I still feel hurt, neglected. I think that you're acting like in a shitty way and so on, right? So, and sometimes it's fair, sometimes it's irrational, because these are emotions, right? But the first step is to have people integrate that into the language, okay? To distinguish between what I know or what I think versus how I'm feeling, yeah. Right? Because if someone says, you're an a-hole, well, that's a statement of fact. You're an a-hole. If someone says, when you talk that way, of course, we'd like to use better language than a-hole, but let's just say, I'm feeling like you're acting like kind of like an a-hole. It feels that way. Okay. Right. And so that it's not semantics. It's a huge difference. So that's the first thing I say. And then the second thing I say is, and this is to your point about if someone has trauma. Okay. I say, again, I don't want to make it shouldn't be a zero-sum game, but someone's needs, someone's feelings, someone's, wishes are going to come at a cost to the other person's needs, feelings, wishes, or whatever. Okay. We don't want it to be a total thing, but someone's going to have to take the hit or something like that. So in trauma, and here's again what I'm saying, and it's so hard. And I've worked with people and I've said that, yes, this person has trauma, like they're being triggered, they're having a traumatic reaction and so on. Okay. So if you're able to have the compassion and empathy to contain yourself, not to react, not to take what they say in that moment to heart and everything like that, all the power to you. Again, as you say, easier said than done, mm-hmm. Right? But you have to recognize your person, they may have PTSD, they may have complex post-traumatic stress disorder, similar but different, right? But it's the same idea that, as you said, like in the moment, your amygdala is on fire. Yeah. They're not being logical. They're being hurtful. They're lashing out. They're shutting down. Maybe they're dissociating. Yeah. And so on. So I say on the one hand, the person doesn't have that, tries to contain, tries to not exacerbate and everything. But on the other hand, I say to the person who has the trauma or the depression or whatever else they're dealing with, I say, you cannot expect that other person to be able to put up with you forever. Right? It'd be nice if they did. It'd be nice if till death do us part, in sickness and health and everything, was a real thing. But for most people, it's not. And I say that, and I say with total compassion, right? But I tell them the hard truth with it, which is you need to take responsibility for what you're going through. And to get that person on board, most people don't want to sign up. They didn't sign up for that. Mm-hmm. Okay. Some people, ahead of time, they knew. Okay. Caveat emptor, buyer beware. Yeah. If you know what you're getting, if you know this person has a history of depression, if you know they have diabetes, if you know they have, some other condition, and you're signing up for that, then I know it's going to be a hard, it's a heavy burden to carry. Yeah. But you sign up for that and then do it with grace and dignity and so on, and hope that you have a fair partnership and working on that. But anyway, the point is that, especially if the person didn't know, or they didn't know the extent of what you're dealing with, they didn't know about the trauma and everything like that, then again, you have to be prepared. This person may leave you. And I always tell the person, I say, and most of the people that I'm dealing with who have the trauma and so on, they really, maybe because of their own trauma, they're very compassionate, they're caring, they're loving, they're giving, they're generous and everything. And I say, if the world had more people like you, it would be a better place. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't. So I tell them again, I don't want to shame you. And I say, again, I'm not doing justice to this because I'm not rushing it and I'm taking time to really deliver to them. And I say, I'm not trying to shame you or anything like that. I'm just being realistic. And I'm telling you right now, when I bring reality into therapy, so it's usually one of the two people likes it. They appreciate it. They go, okay, great. The other person doesn't. Okay. Sometimes they both don't like it because they're both being held to account. Like, I'm sorry, I'm not going to just give you compassion, because compassion without the reality is not compassionate. You're doing a disservice to the person, right? So I say again, and what's the most important sentiment, feeling, emotion that I deal with in therapy?
Resentment.
resentment, right? So I always say that to the person, that if you're going to expect something from the other person or demand something or don't want them to do whatever, just understand the outcome is going to be resentment. Who's going to be able to handle the resentment better? Which resentment is more realistic or fair to expect the other person to have to handle, and so on. Like these are the real life discussions we have. So anyway, I know it's a bit of a digression, but I think it's important for people to not operate in fantasy, because I'll say one more thing, and I'm going to edit part of it out. I'm not going to say it, okay? But my patients know this, that there are many therapists who don't operate that way. And they hear, if someone has trauma, then you, partner, you better do everything in your power to just listen to them and blah, 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 and everything like that. And that's just, and I've seen many therapists, I've heard from patients, even when there's couples, like they'll say, yeah, that's how the therapist dealt with it. It's like, what's wrong with this therapist? Yeah. They don't deal in reality. They deal in fantasy, and they're not doing anybody any good in that regard.
Yeah. And to that point, the way that I address that, like right off the bat with couples, even with individuals who are in relationships, is, when we talk about the trauma and the role that it's playing, it's an explanation, but absolutely not an excuse.
100%.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's watch the next one.
As a man, would you rather be emotionally vulnerable with a woman or a tree? A woman, obviously. Now, I don't think this is a great question, nor is it asked in good faith. It's simply an attempt by men to hijack the man-bear conversation, center it on themselves, and use it to score points against women. But that said, I do still think it's interesting and worth talking about. See, the man or bear question works because it puts one of the most fearsome, terrifying creatures a woman can face against a bear. I'm just playing, sort of. The reason it's so evocative is because the answer shouldn't be the bear. Devoid of any context, the bear should be more of a danger. It is shocking. It provokes an emotional response entirely because the man, who should obviously be the safer option, is, through a lifetime of experience, viewed by women as more threatening and concerning. So now let's look at woman versus tree. Yes, there is a danger to being emotionally vulnerable. That is the definition of vulnerability, putting yourself in a place where you could be harmed. But where is the danger in being emotionally vulnerable to a tree? There is no danger. Men are collectively asking themselves, which would you prefer, danger or no danger, and then collectively patting themselves on the back for all coming up with the answer, no danger. Now, what I find most interesting about this question is while that women's primary concern is living a life free from harassment, from violence, from SA, from rape, the primary concern for men is being emotionally vulnerable, but without any of the risk. Rejecting the vulnerability part of their own question. Not only that, but the horrible fate men have found to compare this to, their equivalent of being mauled by a bear, if you will, is talking to a tree. Being ignored and not listened to. That is their great fear. Now, I think both of these, the fear that being vulnerable will lead to being harmed and the fear of being ignored, are amazing conversations that men indeed do need to be having. Threads that should be pulled on and explored as they tie directly into everything we talk about here. Men's isolation, loneliness, the struggle to connect, the feeling of being disposable and discarded. But those threads won't be explored. They'll be ignored because the concern is never actually about men's mental health. We're not ready to approach these topics in good faith, to have these kinds of conversations. It is just about point scoring against women. Try again in November, I guess.
So I feel like he contradicted himself quite a bit at the end there. He was almost redeeming himself by pointing out all of those areas of men's mental health that need to be addressed and spoken about more clearly. But then he just went and dismissed that very topic by what he said. Because I think the spirit of this woman versus tree is exactly that, to open up the discussion about men's need to be able to speak about their emotions and be vulnerable, whether with women or with men. So that's my first thought on that.
Okay, the joke that he made, I gotta admit, the thing about the most dangerous creature, whatever, and putting him up against a bear, I didn't see it one coming for a second because I just thought, oh God, here he is. Yeah. He's a male feminist. He's gonna say all these things. So kudos to him for that one. I have to give him credit for that. And so a few things. I mean, I liked most of what he said. And I hadn't even thought about that, about the comparison of, okay, bear versus man versus, they're both potentially dangerous, right? Versus, woman, the threat of the woman doing all these things versus no threat at all, no vulnerability, no fear, right? So that is an unfair comparison. Good for him. Like, I like that. I didn't even think about that. Can I
interject for a second though? Yeah. I don't know if that is an apples to apples comparison, because I think the whole spirit of that, the point is that there is danger in men not being able to express their emotions.
Okay, that's looking at it differently. Right. Not okay. Yeah, I'd have to really think about that.
Yeah.
And try to see if that's like what you just said exactly. I'm just trying to think of how they were trying to, let's say, come up with it was basically what he's saying is that they came up with like a gotcha. All right. Like a better comparison. Like I'm just saying the way that the fact that he's saying that it's two different things. Now, someone could argue and say, but wait a second. Again, portraying men, like all men basically, as being as violent as a bear is unfair as well.
Yeah.
And that's where I think his video was lacking because he kept saying it's just scoring points. Well, what was the original video about with women? And it wasn't a good faith discussion about, how to help society or whatever. It was a shit on men thing. So that was scoring points. So I was just saying that I like the idea that he was comparing, saying these are two different things.
Yeah.
Like, it's not, but again, he failed to say that, women were trying to score points as well. It was just a gotcha. So that was my big criticism about that. And then, the idea of trying to, as you've been saying many times, of making it safe for men to be able to, speak about, share, explore, connect with their emotions, because we know that failure to do so is taking a huge toll on society. And by the way, the second video, I think the man said about the suicide thing. If men throw that out, weaponizing it, right? So if you weaponize, that's not cool.
Yeah.
But to deny the fact that men's mental health certainly is suffering, and it's shown in the suicide rates, the greatest metric of distress, or the absolute metric, the ultimate is, suicide. And for and hopelessness and so on. So for men to have such higher rates, 3 to 4 times the higher rates of actual committed suicides, I think it is an important point. So yes, you and I have had videos of this, and again, it bears repeating. You deal with some of the manliest men, who are struggling to be able to, be vulnerable.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess my other issue with this guy is a contradiction that he made is, it's about scoring points. I kind of got the sense that he's trying to score points with women by taking this stance.
Well, that's what I originally thought as well, until I threw the joke in.
Yeah.
But I don't know any of his other videos. So I'm not sure, because the way he described it sounded like he has a series of these videos of trying to discuss these topics. So if it's always in the same manner or the same vein, then yes, it does sound like, okay, maybe he is scoring points, but maybe in the rest of his videos, maybe he does have good faith discussions about, men being vulnerable.
Yeah. And I don't know his content either. So I can't say. Okay.
Right. Again, like I said, I thought I hadn't heard anyone else. Well, actually, I haven't really followed that much. But again, this idea of danger versus, vulnerability and like a tree with no danger kind of thing. Like it wasn't a fair comparison.
Yeah.
By the way, I don't know what would have been a better apples to apples comparison. I'm just trying to think about that. A woman versus, or a certain type of woman versus another one. Like I don't know. Again, the point is both questions. Truly, there's no. I don't know. I'm sure some people did take, let's say, the woman and the bear one. They did take it, they expanded on it, and they made it into like an actual, not a gotcha thing, but let's have a good faith discussion about like you and I had.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe some people did do that, but let's not fool ourselves. Again, all of these damn videos, every single one of them is a got you, a shit upon, a score points, and click, click, click.
Yeah.
Give me some likes.
And therein lies the problem, right? Again, the divisiveness of it and the fact that men and women aren't looking, and regardless of relationships and couples, men and women as species do not appear to be having any desire to work collaboratively, or at least that's the way that this is being portrayed. And, none of the goals of males or females are going to be achieved if we're on complete opposite ends of everything.
Exactly. And we're seeing it statistically in the West. We are seeing that fewer people are settling down and saying, I want to start a family. I want to have children. I mean, it might sound old fashioned, but that is the goal, not for everybody.
Yeah.
But for a species,
Okay.
The replication of the species, of the procreation, that is the goal of every single species, or it's a major goal. And we're seeing it statistically speaking in Canada, in the States, birth rates declining. And when you do surveys and everything like that, you're seeing more and more young people saying, ugh, I would never want to settle down or do, because again, you and I have talked about this in other videos where men and women are being portrayed in the ugliest manner.
Yeah.
Right. And once again, unlike any other time in the history of humanity, kids are seeing this from a younger and younger age. They're being inculcated with this type of hateful, divisive rhetoric and these beliefs and everything from the youngest of ages. So their schemata, right, are being formed so, like, let's say concretely at a younger and younger age. And we know, like, look, boys play with boys for the most part, girls play with girls, so they're yucky, blah, blah, blah. Okay. But that was just like, ew, on a very basic level.
Yeah.
Now they're being told by people that they think they're looking up to, whether male or
There's
female.
There's very specific narratives surrounding it now.
Very, and it's toxic and it's dangerous. The other sex is dangerous. Before it was just icky.
Yeah.
Now it's no, they are dangerous. Okay, from a young age, and boys are in this from the youngest of ages. Why would you marry somebody? And girls are hearing this from the youngest age, like, you don't need a man. Well, yeah, again, it is the way for a society to literally disappear.
And it's so bizarre. And, I guess today's drinking word will be confirmation bias, because I think that, the messages that are being portrayed out there are very much perpetrating a huge confirmation bias that, men are bad, women are bitches, don't get married, don't have kids, don't have a family. This is the patriarchy. And I could go on and on and on. But my point in saying that is, I really don't think that what social media is portraying, and maybe I'm saying a very obvious statement here, but I'll say it anyways. What social media is portraying about these narratives about each gender, it doesn't reflect reality. I don't think that most people are this way. And again, I have a leg to stand on because of the number of people and the diversity of people that I deal with in my work. This doesn't seem to represent reality.
Well, it doesn't represent the reality that we're seeing with adults. But again, never in the history have we seen such divisive rhetoric and hate and suspicion and so on. Again, being promoted to the youngest of ages because they have access to it, right? So give us 10
years. It's
years.
becoming reality, I guess, is what you're saying.
It's becoming reality. Yeah. Yes.
Even though it's not based in reality.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, and the reality is, we know on social media, there's only like a certain percentage, it could be 5% or whatever, that have these extreme views, but they get the most, they're the loudest, they get the most clicks and everything like that. And the algorithms, hate to sound conspiracy theory, but hey, look at TikTok, do a deep dive. It's not, you don't have to even do a deep dive, put your toe in the water and you realize, the people who own TikTok, the country, the country that owns it, they have the heat button and they can make the algorithm promote certain beliefs. And I'm going to tell you right now, and we don't have time to go into this, but others have spent, and I think we've talked about this maybe in other videos, okay? But it's part of a broader narrative. I truly believe it's not just males versus females. It's subversive. It's telling people, look, as a kid, I was the most subversive kid you're going to find, and as a teen as well, okay? But that was just my own thing. I wasn't doing it for a cause or because of this or that. That's just because I was a terrible kid and a teenager, okay? Subversive in that way. But kids are being taught from the youngest of ages, destroy everything, because everything around there, the systems, the history, okay? Everything. It's racist, it's sexist, it's transphobic, it's this, and that, okay? And if you go into the system, you're going to be harmed, or you're going to be perpetrating harm against others, right? So you have to destroy the system. Now, are these kids going to destroy the system? No, they're not, because they're they're kids. And the older ones who are doing all this, a lot of them are not, let's say, they're not world beaters. They're not going to actually destroy it, but they're causing chaos. And the most important thing is, even if they don't change the system, which they won't, okay, again, they have a belief system that the system is not to be trusted. It's only going to hurt them and everything like that. And it's causing them to be anxious. We've talked about this in so many videos. They're anxious, they're scared, and they are seeing the other sex, not just, again, like they're seeing them as dangerous. They're being more afraid, right? And so if you're part of the 90-something% of the high 90% of people who are heterosexual, and that's your option, right? It's a very scary thing. And people, we know with social media, like we know that people are far more likely, young people are far more likely to connect with others, like of the opposite sex, in a romantic way or a dating or a sexual way through online apps first. So they're not even getting that real life connection. Okay. They're going on a date, for example, with a mythical being, because they're having less, again, it's not everybody, but it's becoming more and more segregated. And, and the segregation comes in other ways. Politically, we know males, for example, again, I'm throwing this out here, I want people to kind of consume this. Males are far more likely than females to be conservative, to be Republican, right? And females the opposite, more liberal or NDP, okay, or Democratic, right? And we've seen that now. If you're on one side of the political spectrum, how dare you, even talk to the other? And that's becoming more and more and more obvious, blatant, and pervasive. right? So it's another way that is preventing males and females from having happy, healthy, fulfilling relationships with each other. Okay, because again, oh my God, he's a Republican, he must be a Nazi. So these women aren't getting a chance. And so again, it's just, I can go on and on about that, but I'm just saying it's beyond these stupid videos.
Yeah.
These videos are not the cause. They are a symptom of something much deeper, much greater. And once again, statistically, this is not me just fear mongering here. Statistically, we are seeing the impact. Far fewer people are having children, and far fewer people are planning to have children, and far fewer people are getting into long-term committed relationships that would lead to the formation of a family. And oh my gosh, he said family. Oh, that patriarchal colonialist, blah, blah, blah. How dare he say that? That's the F word,
Yeah.
family.
The new F word. Yeah.
New F word.
It's, I'll try to stay on track here, but, I'll get my tinfoil hat on for a second. And yeah, I won't get into what I think it is, but I firmly believe that this is part of a bigger plan or scheme or something. There is something to this, which it's just so counter to who we are as a species. So
Right.
when something doesn't add up, I typically will sense that there is something greater going on. Related, but somewhat tangential as well, is there's this, so my guilty pleasure is this trash TV show called Married at First Sight. So if anyone hasn't heard of it, Google it. But basically the general premise is there's a group of like 30-ish year old people who have had relationship after relationship that hasn't been successful, and they want to be married. So there's a group of professionals. There's a psychologist, a pastor, and I think a sociologist who are the experts, and they match these people up. And I've watched several seasons of it, and it's so interesting that I would say in the last 4 seasons, there is a distinct decline in the men wanting to have sex with their new wife. And I bring that up because I think that it's relevant to what we're talking about here, where there's this, and this is, don't burn me at the stake for this, but I think that it is natural for a heterosexual man to want to have sex with his new wife. And I understand that, they just met and blah, 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 blah. But it's very bizarre and frankly unmasculine the way that these men are approaching it. And it goes beyond like wanting to respect the woman, because many of these women are like, all I want to do is bone my new husband, and it's just not happening. So to the point that you're making here, it is translating into what I'm seeing on this TV show of this just weird dynamic that's coming out even in these marriages. And I'll point out in some of them that's caused the marriage to break up.
Right. Okay. Well, yeah. It's very interesting. That might be an episode in of itself.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not watching that show. Okay?
Don't. It's a trap. Don't watch it.
Okay. But we can talk about it. Maybe you can talk about the premise and everything. Cause to that point, like it is totally natural. It's chemical.
Yeah.
Okay? We have these chemicals that you put a male and female together, and especially if they're naked or whatever, and if they don't have baggage or whatever that makes them feel resentful toward the other person, you should want to be technically, or own the other person when you're with them.
To get technical, yes. So one more thing, I just want to go back to that comparison that this individual made with regard to danger versus danger for the choice for women and danger versus no danger for men. I think that comparison is erroneous, because when it comes to men, we're looking at psychological safety, and the safety needs of men and the safety needs of women are different. This goes back to what we've spoken about before, that men are equal but different. The needs are different. The need for psychological safety, if not met, can lead to dire consequences. Just like he said, he brought up that point about suicide rates in men being weaponized. No, it shouldn't be weaponized, but it certainly is an unfortunate byproduct of men bottling up their emotions and not being able to express them in a healthy and safe manner.
Yeah, exactly. And it's because I was thinking about that, the danger versus danger and danger versus not. I thought that was actually really clever. Like, it was different. I hadn't thought about it that way. But now you're making it very explicit that no, it is danger versus danger. It's just a different type of danger. It's psychological danger of bottling things up. So, or not being able to express, or not connecting to your emotions. So yes, I agree. So shame on him. I take back anything good I said. All right. Not going that far. I'm not going that far, but I think that is a really important point. And because I haven't watched any of his videos, I hope that other people maybe had made that comment and maybe he reflected on it and said, "Oh, geez, what am I talking about?"
So on that note, we want to hear, listeners, what you think about this discussion today. Do you feel that there is a need for more nuance? Do you think that these questions are poignant that are being asked on social media? Let us know what you think.
Okay, and on that note, until next time, keep your eyes on the road and your hands upon the wheel.